Elarian stood before the towering crystal windows of the Emerald Court's council chamber. His slender elven frame silhouetted against the dying light of another political day. As one of the highest-ranking diplomatic advisors in the realm, he commanded respect not through brute force or inherited power, but through intellect, cunning, and an innate understanding of the delicate balance that kept their world from descending into chaos. But beneath his composed exterior, Elarian carried burdens that would have crushed lesser beings. The silver pendant at his throat pulsed with a faint crimson light, a constant reminder of the demonic pact he had forged in his youth to save his dying house from political extinction. The contract had granted him power and protection, but at a terrible cost. He could never bear children, never continue his bloodline, never fulfill the most basic expectation of his Omega nature. The irony was not lost on him. In a world where Omegas were valued primarily for their ability to produce strong offspring, he had traded away that very capability to gain the political influence necessary to protect his people. It was a sacrifice that haunted him daily, especially now that the Elven Senate was demanding he produce an heir or forfeit his position to a conservative alpha who would undo decades of progressive reform. "My lord," came a gruff voice from the chamber's entrance. "The evening patrol reports are ready for your review." Elarian turned to face Roger, his personal guard and the source of both his greatest comfort and his deepest confusion. The werewolf was younger than him by several decades, built like a warrior with broad shoulders and scarred hands that spoke of countless battles. His dark hair was perpetually disheveled, his green eyes sharp with intelligence that he carefully hid behind a mask of gruff indifference. "Thank you, Roger," Elarian said, accepting the leather-bound reports. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and he felt the familiar spark of electricity that passed between them whenever they touched. It was a sensation he had learned to suppress, knowing that a relationship between an elven diplomat and a werewolf guard would be political suicide. What Elarian didn't know was that Roger harbored secrets of his own. The werewolf was not simply a guard assigned to protect him, he was a spy, planted by his pack to gather intelligence on elven political activities. His mission was clear: obtain samples of Elarian's blood, learn the weaknesses of the elven court, and report back to his alpha with information that could be used to undermine elven authority. But as the months had passed, Roger found himself increasingly conflicted. He had expected to find a typical elven noble, arrogant, entitled, contemptuous of lesser beings. Instead, he had discovered a complex individual who worked tirelessly for the betterment of all races, who treated servants and guards with the same respect he showed to fellow diplomats, who carried himself with a quiet dignity that spoke of inner strength rather than inherited privilege. Moreover, Roger was hiding his own Omega nature, a secret that would have resulted in immediate exile from his pack if discovered. Werewolf society demanded that Omegas submit to pack hierarchy, become breeders and caregivers rather than warriors. But Roger had always been different, stronger, more aggressive, more independent than his biology suggested he should be. He had fought for his place as a warrior, had proven himself in battle time and again, but he knew that his secret would destroy everything he had built if it were ever revealed. "The Border Patrol's report increased demon activity near the Shadowlands," Roger said, his voice carefully neutral. "They recommend increased security for all diplomatic missions." Elarian frowned as he scanned the reports. Demon activity usually meant one thing: someone was making new pacts, trading pieces of their soul for power or knowledge. It was a practice that the Elven Senate officially condemned but privately tolerated, knowing that many of their own members had made such bargains at one time or another. "Have there been any specific threats against the court?" Elarian asked. "None that we've identified," Roger replied. "But my sources suggest that several minor houses are growing desperate. The economic pressures from the trade wars are starting to bite." Elarian nodded thoughtfully. Desperate nobles made dangerous enemies, especially when they had access to demonic magic. He made a mental note to increase security around his own quarters, not for his personal safety, but to protect the sensitive documents and magical artifacts stored there. "Double the night watch," he instructed, "and make sure the wardstones are properly charged. I don't want any uninvited guests materializing in my private chambers." "Already done, my lord," Roger said with what might have been the ghost of a smile. I may be just a simple werewolf, but I do know my job. The comment stung as it was intended to. Roger often made such remarks, subtle reminders of the class differences between them, defensive strikes against intimacy that Elarian had never quite learned to counter. He wanted to tell the werewolf that he had never thought of him as just anything, that his opinions and insights were valued far beyond his official duties. But the words stuck in his throat. Of course, Elarian said instead. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with all the things they couldn't say, all the barriers that kept them apart despite the obvious attraction that crackled between them whenever they were in the same room. It was broken by a sudden chill that swept through the chamber, dropping the temperature by 20 degrees in as many seconds. The candles flickered, their flames turning from warm yellow to cold blue, and shadows began to move independently of their sources. Ismit, Elarian breathed, recognizing the signs of his demonic patron's arrival. Roger's hand immediately went to his weapon, but Elarian held up a restraining gesture. It's all right, he said, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. This is expected. The demon materialized slowly, reality bending around their form like heated glass. Ismit was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were neither fully male nor female, but something that transcended such mundane categories. Their features shifted subtly depending on the viewer's perspective, always maintaining an otherworldly perfection that was both alluring and deeply unsettling. My dear Elarian, Ismit said, their voice carrying harmonics that resonated in the listener's bones. How lovely to see you again, and you've brought a friend. The demon's attention turned to Roger, and Elarian saw the werewolf stiffen under that penetrating gaze. Ismit's eyes seemed to see straight through all pretense, all deception, to the truth that lay beneath. Interesting, Ismit murmured. A werewolf Omega pretending to be an alpha guard. How deliciously subversive. Roger's face went white, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in an instant. His hand tightened on his weapon, but they all knew it would be useless against a demon of Ismit's power. Don't, Elarian said sharply, stepping between them. He's under my protection. Ismit laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with breaking glass. Oh, my darling elf, you still don't understand the nature of protection, do you? This little wolf has been sent to spy on you, to gather intelligence for his pack's eventual assault on your precious court. And yet you defend him. The words hit Elarian like physical blows. He turned to look at Roger, searching the werewolf's face for denial, for some sign that the demon was lying. But he saw only guilt and shame, confirmation of his worst fears. Is it true? Elarian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Roger's jaw worked silently for several seconds before he managed to speak. Yes, he said finally. It's true. I was sent to spy on you. The betrayal cut deeper than Elarian had expected. He had known that getting close to Roger was dangerous, had tried to maintain professional distance, but somewhere along the way he had begun to hope that the attraction between them might be real, that perhaps they could find a way to bridge the gap between their worlds. Why? He asked. Because my pack needs to survive, Roger said, his voice harsh with self-loathing. Because the elven trade agreements are choking our territories. Because my alpha believes that knowledge is the only weapon we have against your superior magic and political power. And the blood? Ismit asked with obvious enjoyment. Tell him about the blood samples, little wolf. Roger flinched as if he had been struck. They wanted samples of your blood, he admitted, to create potions that would enhance our alpha's power, give him an edge in negotiations. Elarian closed his eyes, feeling the last of his naive hopes crumble into ash. Did you get them? No, Roger said quickly. I never took anything. I couldn't bring myself to betray you that completely. How noble, Ismit said sarcastically. A spy with a conscience. How refreshingly original. Elarian opened his eyes and fixed his demonic patron with a hard stare. Why are you here, Ismit? Surely not just to expose my guard's duplicity. Oh, but that's exactly why I'm here, the demon replied with a smile that revealed teeth like polished pearls. You see, dear Elarian, Your little political crisis has reached a critical juncture. The Senate is demanding an heir, and your current reproductive limitations make that rather impossible. I'm aware of the situation, Elarian said coldly. But are you aware of the solution? Ismit asked, their form shifting slightly to become more androgynous, more appealing. I have been thinking about our little contract, about the limitations I placed upon you in exchange for power and protection. Perhaps it's time to renegotiate. Elarian's heart skipped a beat. The possibility of breaking free from the constraints of his demonic pact had haunted his dreams for decades. What would you want in return? Something far more precious than your fertility, Ismit said, their gaze flicking meaningfully toward Roger. I want the key to your heart, freely given. I want you to choose someone to love, someone to trust completely, and then I want you to give them the power to destroy our contract from within. That makes no sense, Elarian said, though his pulse was racing with possibilities. Why would you want to break our agreement? Because, my dear elf, I am bound by contracts of my own, Ismit replied, their perfect facade slipping slightly to reveal something ancient and tired beneath. I too was once mortal, once bound by flesh and emotion and all the messy complications of a physical existence. My current form is as much a prison as it is a source of power. The revelation stunned Elarian into silence. He had never considered that demons might be trapped by their own nature, that immortality and power might come with prices that even they found unbearable. You're saying that if I break my contract, you'll be free as well? He asked. If you break it in the right way with the right person at the right time, Ismit confirmed. Love, you see, has a power that transcends mere magic. It can reshape reality itself, if the participants are willing to pay the price. Elarian looked at Roger, who had remained silent throughout this exchange. His face a mask of confusion and hope and terror. The werewolf's omega nature called to his own. Despite the betrayal, despite the lies, despite all the reasons why they could never be together. What would it require? Elarian asked. A ritual, Ismit said. One that would use your guard's body as a conduit, allowing the power of genuine emotional connection to override the cold logic of our original contract. But it would require absolute trust from both of you, complete honesty, total vulnerability. The implications were staggering. Elarian would have to forgive Roger completely, would have to open his heart to someone who had been sent to destroy him, and Roger would have to risk everything, his position, his pack, his carefully guarded secrets to participate in a magical working that might very well kill them both. I need time to think, Elarian said. Time is something you have very little of, Ismit warned. The Senate convenes in 3 days to vote on your successor. If you cannot produce evidence of an heir by then, you will lose everything you have worked to build. With that, the demon began to fade, reality reasserting itself around their diminishing form. Choose wisely, dear Elarian. Choose with your heart, not your head. It's the only way any of us will find freedom. And then they were gone, leaving Elarian and Roger alone in the chamber with nothing but the weight of revealed truths and impossible choices. Chapter 2. The Weight of Secrets. The silence that followed Ismit's departure was deafening. Elarian stood frozen by the crystal windows, his reflection ghost-like in the darkening glass, while Roger remained near the door like a prisoner awaiting sentence. The revelations of the past hour hung between them like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. You should dismiss me, Roger said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Report my betrayal to the court guards, have me arrested for espionage. It's what any sensible diplomat would do. Elarian turned slowly to face him, studying the werewolf's features as if seeing them for the first time. The scarred hands that had protected him from assassins, the green eyes that had watched over him through countless late nights, the mouth that had spoken lies even as it had offered comfort and companionship. Is that what you want? Elarian asked quietly. Roger's composure cracked, revealing the pain beneath his stoic mask. What I want doesn't matter. It never has. I'm a spy, a traitor, an omega pretending to be something I'm not. I've built my entire existence on deception. That's not an answer to my question. The werewolf's hands clenched into fists at his sides. No, he said finally. No, it's not what I want. What I want is impossible. Forbidden. A fantasy that would destroy us both if anyone discovered it. Elarian moved closer, drawn by the raw honesty in Roger's voice. Tell me anyway. I want to be worthy of you, Roger whispered. I want to be someone you could choose without shame, without political consequences, without destroying everything you've worked to build. I want to touch you without thinking about the orders my alpha gave me, without remembering that I'm supposed to be gathering intelligence for your enemies. The confession hung in the air between them, dangerous and electric. Elarian felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble, the professional distance he had maintained for months finally proving inadequate against the force of genuine emotion. You said you never took blood samples, Elarian said. I didn't. Why? Roger's laugh was bitter, self-deprecating. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped being a spy and started being your guard. Because the first time you treated me like an equal instead of a subordinate, I began to forget why I was really here. Because watching you work, seeing how much you care about everyone under your protection, I realized that betraying you would be like tearing out my own heart. Elarian reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against Roger's cheek. The werewolf leaned into the touch despite himself, his eyes closing as if he could memorize the sensation. The demon's offer, Elarian said. What do you think it means? I think it means we're both pawns in someone else's game, Roger replied, though he didn't pull away from Elarian's touch. Demons don't make offers out of kindness. There's always a price, always a catch we can't see. Perhaps. But what if this time the price is worth paying? Roger opened his eyes, meeting Elarian's gaze directly. You can't seriously be considering it. The ritual Ismit described it could kill us both. And even if it worked, even if you could break your contract and produce an heir, what then? I'm still a werewolf spy. You're still an elven diplomat. Our worlds don't mix. Our worlds are already mixing, Elarian pointed out. You've been living in mine for months. You know its customs, its people, its politics better than most elves. And I've learned more about werewolf culture from you than from decades of formal study. That's different. That's temporary. Once my mission is complete, once my pack gets what they need from me, I'll be recalled to the territories. We'll never see each other again. The thought of losing Roger, of returning to the empty existence he had known before the werewolf's arrival, sent a chill through Elarian's chest. What if you didn't go back? I can't abandon my pack, Roger said immediately. They're my family, my responsibility. Without the intelligence I provide, they'll be vulnerable to elven economic pressure, unable to negotiate fair trade agreements. What if there was another way? What if you could serve your pack's interests without betraying mine? Roger frowned, trying to follow Elarian's reasoning. I don't understand. As my mate, you would have access to the highest levels of elven government, Elarian explained, his heart racing at the audacity of what he was suggesting. You could advocate for werewolf interests from within the system, could ensure that any trade agreements were fair to both sides. Your pack would gain a powerful ally instead of just intelligence reports. The werewolf stared at him in shock. Mate, you're talking about a formal bonding. I'm talking about making a choice, Elarian said. A choice to trust each other completely, to build something together instead of remaining trapped by the roles others have assigned us. The political fallout would be enormous, Roger warned. An elven diplomat bonding with a werewolf guard? The conservatives would use it to destroy everything you've accomplished. Let them try, Elarian said with quiet determination. I've spent my entire career building bridges between different peoples, proving that cooperation is stronger than conflict. Perhaps it's time I demonstrated that principle in my personal life as well. Roger was quiet for several long moments, his expression cycling through hope, fear, longing, and doubt. The demon's ritual, he said finally. You really think it would work? I think Ismit is older and more powerful than either of us can imagine, Elarian replied. I think they understand magic in ways that we don't. And I think they're right about love having a power that transcends conventional spellwork. Love, Roger repeated, the word barely audible. Love, Elarian confirmed, his hand still cupping the werewolf's face. Is that so impossible to believe? Instead of answering with words, Roger leaned forward and kissed him. It was desperate and tender at the same time, weeks of suppressed longing finally finding expression. Elarian responded eagerly, his arms coming up to encircle the werewolf's broad shoulders, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their hearts racing with excitement and possibility. "We're insane," Roger said, but he was smiling. "Probably," Elarian agreed. "But if we're going to be insane, we might as well be insane together." Chapter 3: The First Ritual. The next evening found them in Elarian's private chambers, surrounded by candles and arcane symbols drawn in silver ink upon the polished floor. Ismit had provided detailed instructions for the ritual, along with warnings about the potential consequences if anything went wrong. Both men had spent the day in preparation, fasting and meditating, clearing their minds of doubt and fear. "Are you certain about this?" Elarian asked as they took their positions within the magical circle. "Once we begin, there's no turning back." Roger nodded, though his hands were trembling slightly. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, and never more terrified." They had both stripped to the waist for the ceremony, their skin marked with protective runes that would hopefully prevent the magical energies from tearing them apart. Elarian's elven heritage was evident in the pale perfection of his form, while Roger's werewolf nature showed in the scars and muscle definition that spoke of a life spent in combat. "Remember," Elarian said as they joined hands in the center of the circle. "The demon said the ritual requires absolute honesty. No secrets, no hidden agendas, no protective walls between us." "That may be the most dangerous part of all," Roger said with a nervous laugh. Elarian began to chant in the ancient elven tongue, his voice rising and falling in patterns that predated written history. The candles around them flared brighter, their flames turning from yellow to blue to silver, and the air itself began to thicken with gathering power. Roger felt the magic entering his body like liquid lightning, burning along his nerves and setting every cell ablaze with supernatural energy. But instead of pain, he felt only warmth, only connection, only the overwhelming sensation of being truly seen and accepted for the first time in his life. Through the magical link forming between them, Elarian could feel every emotion coursing through Roger's mind and heart. The werewolf's love was like a beacon in the darkness, pure and fierce and completely without reservation. But beneath it lay layers of shame and self-doubt, the scars left by years of hiding his true nature from his pack. "You don't have to hide anymore," Elarian whispered, his voice carrying both physically and telepathically. "Not from me, not from anyone. You are perfect exactly as you are." The words shattered the last of Roger's defenses, and his own power began to flow freely through the magical circuit they had created. His werewolf strength merged with Elarian's elven grace, creating something new and unprecedented in their world's history. The ritual reached its crescendo as silver light erupted from their joined hands, washing over both men and searing away the magical constraints that had bound Elarian for so long. The demonic contract written in blood and shadow began to unravel, its terms overridden by the simple fact of two beings choosing each other freely and completely. But as the old magic died, new magic was born. The love between them became something tangible, a force that reshaped reality around them, creating possibilities that had never existed before. When the light finally faded, they found themselves collapsed together on the chamber floor, their bodies intertwined, their hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Elarian could feel the change immediately. The artificial barriers that had prevented him from conceiving were gone, replaced by a fertility that was enhanced rather than diminished by their magical working. "Did it work?" Roger asked, his voice hoarse from the magical strain. Elarian placed his hand over his heart, feeling the new life force flowing through his veins. "It worked. The contract is broken. I'm free. And Ismit, I can feel their presence fading," Elarian said wonderingly. "They're being released from whatever bound them to this form. The demon was telling the truth, they're free as well." Roger pushed himself up on his elbows, looking down at Elarian with eyes that glowed with residual magic. So what happens now? Now we face the consequences, Elarian said, but he was smiling. Together. Chapter 4, Political Storms. The Senate meeting 3 days later was a political battlefield disguised as a formal assembly. Elarian stood before the gathered representatives of Elven society, their faces ranging from curious to hostile to openly contemptuous. At his side stood Roger, no longer disguised as a simple guard but formally presented as his chosen mate and diplomatic partner. Lord Elarian, said Senator Butlers, the leader of the conservative faction, you claim to have resolved the succession crisis, but the evidence you present is unprecedented, scandalous, and contrary to every tradition our people hold sacred. I present evidence of a successful magical working, Elarian replied calmly. The conception has been confirmed by 3 independent healers. The child will be born with the combined strengths of elven and werewolf heritage, a living symbol of the cooperation that will define our future. A mongrel child, Butlers spat, an abomination that mocks the purity of elven bloodlines. A child conceived in love and strengthened by unity, Elarian countered. A child who will inherit the best qualities of both races. The debate raged for hours, with senators arguing about precedent, tradition, political implications, and social order. But as the day wore on, it became clear that Elarian had allies as well as enemies. The younger generation of elven nobility, those who had grown up with his progressive policies, spoke eloquently about the need for change, for adaptation, for bridges between different peoples. The question before us, said Senator Ithilwyn, a moderate who commanded respect from both factions, is not whether this union meets our traditional expectations. The question is whether it serves the greater good of our people. How can a union with our enemies serve any good purpose? Butlers demanded. Because they're not our enemies, Roger said, speaking for the first time since the session began. His voice was steady, confident, carrying the authority of someone who had finally accepted his own worth. My pack has been driven to espionage not by hatred, but by desperation. The current trade agreements leave werewolf territories with insufficient resources to feed their families, to maintain their communities, to preserve their culture. So you admit to being a spy, Butlers said triumphantly. I admit to serving my people's interests, Roger replied, just as every person in this chamber serves elven interests. The difference is that I'm now in a position to serve both peoples simultaneously, to ensure that cooperation replaces conflict. And why should we trust the word of a werewolf spy? Roger's hand moved to rest on Elarian's shoulder, the gesture both protective and intimate. Because I've proven my loyalty through my actions. I chose love over duty, truth over deception, partnership over domination. I chose your people's greatest diplomat as my mate, and I will spend my life ensuring that his vision of unity becomes reality. The simple honesty of the statement resonated through the chamber, touching even some of the conservative senators. Here was a being who had sacrificed everything for love, who had turned his back on his original mission to embrace a larger purpose. The child, Senator Ithilwyn said thoughtfully, will be eligible for inheritance under our laws? The child will be my legitimate heir, Elarian confirmed. Conceived through sacred ritual, blessed by ancient magic, carrying bloodlines that stretch back to the founding of our realm. And the werewolf territories will cease their resistance to our trade policies? They will negotiate as equals, Roger said. They will have a voice in the decisions that affect their people. They will be partners rather than subjects. The final vote was closer than either man had dared hope. The conservatives fought bitterly, but the promise of peace with the werewolf clans, combined with Elarian's proven track record of successful diplomacy, proved compelling to the moderate senators. When the results were announced, 53 votes in favor, 47 opposed. Elarian felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had kept his position, secured his child's future, and opened the door for a new era of cooperation between their peoples. You did it, Roger said quietly as they left the chamber together. We did it, Elarian corrected. We chose each other, and that choice changed everything. Chapter 5, The Return of Ismit. 6 months later, as Elarian's pregnancy became visibly apparent and the new trade agreements began to show positive results for both elven and werewolf communities, they received an unexpected visitor. Ismit appeared in their private garden as they were sharing an evening meal, but the demon's form was different, subtly more human, less otherworldly, as if their connection to the infernal realms had been weakened or altered. "My dear friends," Ismit said, their voice warmer than it had ever been before, "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I wanted to congratulate you on your success." "Ismit," Elarian said cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to protect his swelling belly. "I thought you had been freed from this realm." "I was," the demon confirmed. "But freedom, I discovered, does not necessarily mean departure. I chose to return, to take on a new role in this reality." "What kind of role?" Roger asked suspiciously. Ismit smiled, and for the first time, the expression seemed genuinely warm rather than predatory. "Guardian, protector, friend if you'll have me. You see, the ritual that freed me from my infernal contracts also revealed something I had forgotten during my centuries of demonic existence. I was once mortal, once capable of love and loyalty and all the messy complications of physical life." "You're saying you want to stay human?" Elarian asked. "I'm saying I want to stay connected to the mortal realm," Ismit replied. "I want to help protect what you've built, to ensure that the changes you've started continue to spread throughout our world." The offer was tempting, but both men remained wary. Demons, even reformed ones, were not known for their reliability. "What would you want in return?" Roger asked. "Nothing but your friendship," Ismit said simply. "I have spent eons manipulating mortals for my own purposes, trading in their pain and desperation for power and influence. I would like to try something different, to help rather than harm, to build rather than destroy." Elarian studied the demon's face, using his diplomatic skills to read the truth behind their words. What he saw there surprised him: genuine remorse, honest hope, and something that might have been loneliness. "You'll have to prove yourself," he said finally. "Trust is earned, not freely given." "I understand," Ismit replied, "and I'm prepared to spend however long it takes to earn that trust." Over the following months, the former demon proved true to their word. They helped negotiate several difficult diplomatic crises, using their vast knowledge and experience to prevent conflicts before they could escalate into wars. They served as an informal advisor to Elarian's growing network of progressive allies, offering insights that proved invaluable in the complex political landscape of interspecies relations. But more than that, they became a friend. Someone who understood the weight of carrying ancient secrets, the difficulty of choosing love over duty, the challenge of building something new from the ashes of old conflicts. Chapter 6. The Child of Two Worlds. When Elarian's son was born on the winter solstice, he emerged into a world that had already begun to change because of his existence. The child was beautiful in the way that mixed heritage often produced, with his elven parents' delicate features and his werewolf parents' strength and vitality. "He's perfect," Roger whispered, cradling the infant with hands that trembled with awe and love. "He's absolutely perfect." Elarian smiled tiredly from the birthing bed, exhausted but triumphant. "He's ours. That's all that matters." The child's birth had been attended by representatives from both elven and werewolf communities, their presence serving as witness to the new era of cooperation that his existence symbolized. Even former enemies had come to pay their respects, acknowledging that whatever their personal feelings about the unconventional union, the political benefits were undeniable. "What will you name him?" asked Elder Moonwhisper, the ancient elven healer who had overseen the birth. Elarian and Roger exchanged glances, having debated this question for months. They had chosen a name that honored both their heritages while looking forward to the future their son would help create. "Elric," Elarian said. "It means noble ruler in the old elven tongue." "With the werewolf surname Stormheart," Roger added, "for the courage to weather any storm." "Elric Stormheart," Elder Moonwhisper repeated thoughtfully. "A name that bridges two worlds. May he live up to its promise." As the celebrations continued around them, the small family found a moment of quiet together. Ismit approached them carefully, their reformed demonic nature allowing them to appreciate the scene without the predatory hunger that had once defined their existence. He will face challenges that neither of you can imagine, Ismit said softly. The world is changing, but change brings both opportunity and danger. There will be those who see his mixed heritage as a threat to the old order. Then we'll protect him, Roger said fiercely. All of us together. And we'll teach him to protect himself, Elarian added. He'll inherit our strengths, but he'll also need to develop his own. Ismit nodded approvingly. That's all any parent can do, prepare their children for the world they'll inherit, not the world they've known. The demon paused, then reached into their robes and withdrew a small crystal pendant that pulsed with soft, multicolored light. A gift, they said, offering it to Elarian. For the child. It will protect him from harmful magic, but more importantly, it will help him understand his own nature as he grows. Elarian accepted the pendant carefully, feeling the warm magic that flowed through it. Unlike the cold power of his old demonic contract, this magic felt alive, nurturing, protective. Thank you, he said sincerely, for everything. For the ritual, for the freedom, for choosing to stay and help rather than simply disappearing. Thank you for showing me that redemption is possible, Ismit replied. That even demons can choose to become something better. Chapter 7 New Alliances. As young Elric grew from infant to toddler, the political landscape continued to evolve around him. The success of the Elven Werewolf Alliance had inspired other interspecies partnerships, creating a network of cooperation that spanned the known world. Elarian found himself at the center of these developments, his role evolving from simple diplomat to architect of a new international order. Roger proved to be an invaluable partner in these efforts, his warrior's instincts helping to identify potential threats, while his Omega's emotional intelligence allowed him to build bridges between former enemies. The Dragon clans are requesting a formal meeting, Roger reported as they reviewed the week's correspondence in their expanded office. They're interested in establishing trade relations, but they want guarantees about territorial sovereignty. Understandable, Elarian replied, bouncing 3-year-old Elric on his lap while simultaneously reviewing diplomatic contracts. Dragons have long memories when it comes to broken promises. We'll need to offer them something substantial to prove our good faith. Access to the northern mining territories? Roger suggested. The Senate has been looking for ways to reduce the overhead costs of maintaining those operations. It could work, Elarian agreed. Dragons are natural miners, and they'd be more efficient than our current crews. Plus, it would give them a legitimate reason to be involved in regional politics. Their conversation was interrupted by Elric, who had grown bored with the adult discussion and was now attempting to eat one of the diplomatic scrolls. No, little one, Elarian said gently, redirecting the child's attention to a set of wooden toys that Ismit had crafted. Those are for reading, not eating. Elric giggled and immediately began building something elaborate with the blocks, his mixed heritage evident in the way he combined elven precision with werewolf enthusiasm. He was developing into a remarkable child, bright, curious, fearless, and possessed of an intuitive understanding of magic that amazed his parents and teachers. He's going to be powerful, Roger observed, watching their son manipulate the toys with casual telekinesis. More powerful than either of us. Power without wisdom is dangerous, Elarian said thoughtfully. We'll need to make sure he understands the responsibility that comes with his abilities. He'll have good teachers, Ismit said, materializing in their usual dramatic fashion. The former demon had become a regular presence in their lives, serving as advisor, protector, and surrogate family member. Any word from the southern territories? Elarian asked. The vampire courts are still debating whether to join the alliance, Ismit reported. They're concerned about the implications for their feeding rights, but I think they can be convinced if we offer them alternatives. Such as voluntary blood donation programs, Ismit suggested. Paid positions for willing donors, medical oversight to ensure safety, legal protections for both parties. It would transform vampirism from predation to symbiosis. The idea was revolutionary, challenging thousands of years of vampire tradition, but it was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that had made their alliance successful. Draw up a proposal, Elarian decided. We'll present it to the vampire lords next month. Their planning session was interrupted by a commotion from the outer office. Raised voices, the sound of guards mobilizing, the distinctive crackle of defensive wards being activated. Stay with Elric, Roger instructed, his warrior instincts taking over as he moved toward the door. But before he could reach it, the door burst open, revealing a figure that made Elarian's blood run cold. Senator Valdres stood in the doorway, his face twisted with hatred and madness, his hands glowing with destructive magic. Abomination, the conservative senator snarled. Your mongrel spawn has corrupted our people long enough. It's time to cleanse the bloodlines. He raised his hands to cast a killing spell, but Roger was already moving, his werewolf speed allowing him to intercept the attack. The two men crashed together in a tangle of claws and magic, their battle spilling across the office and threatening to destroy everything in their path. Elarian scooped up Elric, shielding the child with his body while desperately trying to reach the emergency communication crystals. But Valdres was more powerful than any of them had realized, his hatred having driven him to make his own demonic pacts in pursuit of the strength needed to destroy what he saw as an existential threat to elven purity. Ismit, Elarian called desperately. The former demon appeared instantly, their reformed nature not diminishing their magical abilities in the slightest. They engaged Valdres directly, their power clashing with his in a display that shook the very foundations of the building. But the senator had come prepared for this confrontation, armed with weapons designed specifically to counter demonic magic. He managed to wound Ismit severely, sending the former demon crashing into the wall with a spray of golden blood. It was then that something unexpected happened. Young Elric, frightened by the violence and desperate to protect his family, reached out with his developing magical abilities. But instead of the raw, uncontrolled power that might be expected from a 3-year-old, his magic was precise, focused, devastating. The child's power struck Valdres like a physical blow, not harming him but simply stopping him, freezing him in place, canceling his spells, rendering him as helpless as an ordinary mortal. Stop hurting my family, Elric said, his young voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond his years. The battle was over. Valdres stood paralyzed, his eyes wide with terror as he realized that the child he had come to destroy possessed power that dwarfed his own. Roger and Ismit picked themselves up from the floor, battered but alive, while Elarian held his son and marveled at what the boy had accomplished. It's all right, Elarian whispered to Elric. You're safe. We're all safe. But even as he spoke the words, he knew that this attack was just the beginning. There would be others who saw their family as a threat, who believed that the old ways were worth killing to preserve. They would need to be more careful, more vigilant, more prepared to defend what they had built. Chapter 8: The Growing Storm. The attack by Senator Valdres sent shockwaves through the political establishment. The revelation that a respected member of the Elven Senate had made demonic pacts in pursuit of racial purity exposed the hypocrisy at the heart of the conservative movement, while young Elric's display of power demonstrated that the next generation would be far more formidable than anyone had anticipated. The investigation is revealing connections we never suspected, Roger reported as they met in their heavily warded private chambers. Valdres wasn't acting alone. There's an entire network of conservatives who have been making dark bargains to gain the power needed to resist the changes we've implemented. Elarian rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. How many are we talking about? At least 24 senators, maybe more, Roger said grimly. Plus their allies in the military, the merchant guilds, even some of the religious orders. They call themselves the Purest Alliance, and they see our family as the symbol of everything that's wrong with the modern world. They're afraid, Ismit observed from their position near the window, where they were maintaining a constant watch for potential threats. Fear makes people do terrible things, but it also makes them predictable. They'll escalate, become more desperate, more careless, which makes them more dangerous, Elarian pointed out. In the short term, yes, Ismit agreed. But their extremism will also alienate potential supporters. Every attack they make, every dark pact they reveal, every act of violence they commit will turn public opinion against them. 4-year-old Elric sat on the floor nearby, building elaborate structures with his magical toys while apparently paying no attention to the adult conversation. But Elarian had learned to recognize the signs of his son's unusual awareness, the way the child's constructions sometimes seemed to mirror the political situations they were discussing, the subtle magical emanations that suggested he was processing far more than his age should allow. We need to accelerate our timeline, Elarian decided. If the purists are organizing, we can't afford to wait for gradual change. We need to present the other races with a unified front, a clear alternative to the old system. The Grand Alliance, Roger said, understanding immediately. You want to formalize all the individual agreements into a single treaty. I want to create something that can survive our deaths, Elarian clarified. Something that doesn't depend on personal relationships or individual charisma. A new political structure that makes cooperation more profitable than conflict. It was an ambitious plan, one that would require delicate negotiations with dozens of different species, each with their own customs, prejudices, and territorial concerns. But the alternative, continuing to fight a series of individual battles against enemies who were growing stronger and more desperate, was even more daunting. Over the following months, they threw themselves into the work of alliance building with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Elarian's diplomatic skills were pushed to their limits as he navigated the complex web of interspecies politics, while Roger used his connections in the werewolf territories to build a network of military support that could defend their nascent coalition. Ismit proved invaluable in these efforts, their centuries of experience allowing them to identify potential problems before they became crises, to suggest solutions that nobody else would have considered, to serve as a neutral mediator when negotiations became too heated. But it was Elric who provided the most compelling argument for cooperation. As the child grew and his abilities developed, he became a living symbol of what was possible when different peoples chose unity over division. His mixed heritage allowed him to communicate with beings from multiple species. His intuitive magic let him solve problems that had baffled trained diplomats. And his simple, innocent questions often cut through layers of prejudice and tradition to reveal the underlying truth of any situation. Why can't the dragon clans and the dwarf kingdoms share the mountain territories? He asked during one particularly difficult negotiation session. There's lots of room under the ground for both of them. The simplicity of the observation broke through weeks of deadlocked discussions, leading to a breakthrough agreement that satisfied both parties and established a template for similar disputes. Your son has a gift for seeing solutions that adults miss, observed High Chancellor Drakmer, the ancient dragon who served as chief negotiator for his people. Perhaps because he hasn't yet learned that certain things are supposed to be impossible. He's not bound by our assumptions, Elarian agreed. He sees the world as it could be, not as it is. But even as their alliance grew stronger, so did the opposition. The purist movement had gone underground after Valdris's arrest, but intelligence reports suggested they were preparing something far more devastating than individual assassination attempts. They're massing forces in the northern wasteland, Roger reported after returning from a reconnaissance mission. Military units from multiple species, all united by their hatred of our reforms. They're calling it the Army of Purity, and they're planning to march on the capital within the month. The irony was not lost on any of them. The purists, who claimed to oppose cooperation between different species, had themselves formed an alliance to achieve their goals. But their alliance was built on shared hatred rather than mutual benefit, making it both powerful and unstable. How many soldiers are we talking about? Elarian asked. At least 10,000, Roger said grimly. Maybe twice that. They've been recruiting from conservative factions across the continent, promising to restore the old order and eliminate the mongrel contamination that they blame for their problems. And our forces? We have the loyalty of the progressive factions, but many of them have never seen real combat, Roger admitted. We have quality on our side, but they have numbers. Elarian looked at his son, who had stopped playing and was now listening to their conversation with obvious understanding. At 5 years old, Elric possessed magical abilities that surpassed most adult practitioners, but he was still a child, still vulnerable in ways that kept his parents awake at night. "We need to evacuate him," Elarian said quietly. "Get him somewhere safe while we deal with this threat." "No," Elric said firmly, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "I won't leave. This is my home too, and I want to help protect it." "You're too young," Roger said gently. "War is not a place for children." "I'm not like other children," Elric pointed out with the matter-of-fact honesty that only the very young could achieve. "My magic is different, stronger. Maybe I can do things that other people can't." Elarian knelt down to his son's level, looking into eyes that seemed far too wise for a 5-year-old face. "What are you thinking, little one? The purists want to fight because they're afraid," Elric said thoughtfully. "They think we're going to take away everything they care about. But we're not. We just want everyone to be able to choose their own path." "That's true," Elarian agreed. "But they don't seem willing to listen to reason." "Maybe they will if the right person talks to them," Elric suggested. "Maybe they will if they can see that I'm not scary, just different." The idea was both brilliant and terrifying. Using a child as a diplomatic envoy went against every instinct Elarian possessed. But there was something to be said for Elric's reasoning. The purists' greatest fear was of the unknown, of changes they couldn't predict or control. But faced with an actual mixed-heritage child, speaking with innocence and honesty about his hopes for the future, some of them might be willing to reconsider their positions. "It's too dangerous," Roger said immediately. "Everything we do is dangerous," Ismit pointed out. "But the child may be right. Sometimes the most unexpected approach is the most effective." "I won't put him in harm's way," Elarian said firmly. "You won't have to," Elric said with a smile that was both childlike and ancient. "I can protect myself now, and I have all of you to protect me too." Chapter 9: The Child's Gambit. The meeting took place in a neutral zone at the edge of the wasteland, under banners of truce that both sides had sworn to honor. Elarian and his delegation arrived to find themselves facing the leaders of the Purist Alliance, their faces hard with hatred and determination. At the center of the Purist leadership stood General Korath, a werewolf who had rejected his pack's decision to join the new alliance, and Archon Silvermoon, an elf whose family had been prominent in conservative politics for centuries. Both men radiated the kind of absolute certainty that made compromise seem impossible. "You brought a child to a military negotiation?" General Korath said with obvious contempt when he saw Elric walking between his parents. "Have you finally run out of adult supporters?" "I brought my son because this conflict is about his future," Elarian replied calmly. "About the world he'll inherit and the choices he'll have the right to make. The only choice mongrels should have is exile or death," Archon Silvermoon said coldly. "Your spawn represents everything that's wrong with the modern world: the corruption of pure bloodlines, the dilution of ancient strengths, the abandonment of natural order." Elric stepped forward before either of his parents could stop him, his young face serious but unafraid. "What makes you think I'm corrupted?" he asked with genuine curiosity. The directness of the question caught the Purist leaders off guard. They had expected defiance, anger, political maneuvering, but not simple inquiry from a child. "You're a mixture of incompatible species," General Korath said finally. "Elven magic and werewolf instincts don't belong in the same body. You're an abomination against nature." "But I'm not sick," Elric pointed out. "I'm not weak or broken or wrong. I can do magic like my daddy, and I can run fast and smell things like my papa. I'm not less than both, I'm more than either." "Lies," Archon Silvermoon spat. "Dark magic, designed to hide your true deformities." Instead of arguing further, Elric simply demonstrated. He reached out with his magical abilities, not to attack or defend, but to heal. Several of the Purist soldiers were carrying old injuries, scars from previous battles, chronic pains that had been troubling them for years. With casual precision that would have impressed the most skilled healers in the realm, the 5-year-old began to mend their hurts. The effect was immediate and undeniable. Men who had been limping for months found themselves walking normally. Scars that had ached for years suddenly stopped hurting. Clouded vision cleared, chronic fatigue lifted, old bone breaks finally healed properly. "This is what my magic does," Elric said simply. "It fixes things. It makes things better." How is that wrong? The silence that followed was deafening. The purest leaders stood frozen, their entire worldview challenged by the reality of what they had just witnessed. Their followers began to murmur among themselves, questioning the rhetoric they had been fed about mongrel weakness and corrupted power. "Demon tricks," General Karath said finally, but his voice lacked its former conviction. "I'm not a demon," Elric said patiently. "I'm just a little boy who wants everyone to be happy and healthy and safe. Why do you want to hurt people instead of helping them?" The question hung in the air like a blade. These were soldiers, warriors who had dedicated their lives to protecting their peoples, being asked by a child why they had chosen destruction over creation. "We're trying to preserve our heritage," Archon Silvermoon said, but his voice was defensive now rather than aggressive. "You can preserve your heritage without destroying mine," Elric replied. "There's room for everyone to be who they are. I'm not trying to make all the elves become werewolves, or all the werewolves become elves. I'm just asking everyone to be nice to each other." The simple honesty of the statement seemed to cut through decades of indoctrination and prejudice. Several of the purest soldiers actually stepped back, their weapons lowering as they reconsidered what they were fighting for. But not all of them were willing to abandon their cause. A small group of the most radical extremists, led by a scarred vampire named Lord Blackthorn, pushed forward with weapons drawn. "Enough," Blackthorn snarled. "Pretty words and healing magic won't change the fact that this creature is a threat to everything we hold sacred. If you won't destroy it, we will." The vampire lunged toward Elric with inhuman speed, his claws extended and his fangs bared. But he never reached the child. Roger intercepted him with werewolf reflexes, while his mid appeared between them with demonic power, and Elarian's magic created a barrier that held the other extremists at bay. But it was Elric himself who ended the confrontation. Instead of hiding behind his parents' protection, he stepped forward and placed his small hand on Lord Blackthorn's forehead. The vampire's expression immediately changed from rage to wonder as the child's healing magic went to work on wounds that were far deeper than the physical. "You're hurt inside," Elric said softly. "Someone you loved was taken away, and it made you angry at everyone else. But hurting other people won't bring them back. It'll just make more people sad like you are." Lord Blackthorn's face crumpled, centuries of grief and rage finally finding release. The vampire fell to his knees, sobbing like a child as the emotional healing that Elric had performed began to take effect. The demonstration was more powerful than any speech or political argument could have been. Here was a child who had just been attacked, responding not with violence but with compassion, not seeking to destroy his enemies but to heal them. "This is what the future looks like," Elarian said quietly, addressing both the purest leaders and his own supporters. "Not conquest or domination, but understanding. Not the triumph of one people over another, but cooperation between all peoples." General Karath stood silent for several long moments, his warrior's instincts warring with the evidence of his own eyes. Finally, he threw down his weapon and stepped forward. "I came here to destroy a monster," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Instead, I find a healer, a teacher, a bridge between worlds. How can I fight against that?" One by one, the other purist leaders followed his example. Some threw down their weapons and surrendered. Others simply turned and walked away, unwilling to continue a war that no longer made sense to them. Only a few die-hard extremists refused to abandon their cause, but without popular support, they posed little real threat. The crisis was over, ended not by superior force or political maneuvering, but by the simple power of a child who refused to see enemies where he could see friends. Chapter 10: The New World. 5 years later, the Grand Alliance had become a reality that surpassed even Elarian's most optimistic dreams. The capital city of New Harmony was a marvel of interspecies cooperation, where elves and werewolves worked alongside dragons and vampires, where demons served as mediators and healers, where the old divisions of race and caste had been replaced by more meaningful distinctions of skill and character. Elarian served as the alliance's first chancellor, a position that required him to balance the competing interests of dozens of different peoples while maintaining the delicate diplomatic relationships that kept their coalition stable. It was challenging work, but deeply satisfying, especially when he could see the tangible results in the prosperity and peace that had spread throughout their territories. Roger had become the alliance's military commander, responsible for training integrated forces that drew from the best traditions of all member species. His werewolf background had proven invaluable in creating a warrior culture that emphasized protection over conquest, defense over aggression. Ismit continued to serve as their advisor and protector, but had also taken on a new role as ambassador to the supernatural realms. Their unique perspective as a reformed demon allowed them to negotiate with beings that others found incomprehensible or terrifying. But it was 10-year-old Elric who had become the true symbol of what their new world could achieve. The boy's powers had continued to develop in ways that amazed even the most experienced magical theorists, but more importantly, his wisdom and compassion had grown to match his abilities. He served as an unofficial mediator for conflicts that adults found too complex or emotionally charged to resolve, and his presence at diplomatic functions had become a guarantee of successful negotiations. The southern kingdoms are requesting admission to the alliance, Roger reported as they held their weekly family meeting in the garden of their modest home. Despite their prominent positions, they had chosen to live simply, believing that true leadership came from service rather than privilege. All of them? Elarian asked, surprised. The southern kingdoms had been among the last holdouts against interspecies cooperation, their desert cultures traditionally suspicious of outside influence. All but the Scorpion Sultanate, Roger confirmed, and even they're showing signs of wavering. Their trade revenues have dropped significantly since they've been excluded from alliance markets. Economics where ideology fails, Ismit observed with amusement. Nothing converts conservatives quite like empty treasuries. Elric looked up from the mechanical dragon he was assembling with a combination of magic and traditional engineering. What about the people who don't want to join? Are we going to force them? It was exactly the kind of question that kept his parents awake at night, the moral complexity that their success had created. The alliance had grown powerful enough to compel membership, but doing so would violate the very principles on which it had been founded. No, Elarian said firmly. We can't build a free society by taking away people's freedom to choose. But we can make sure that the benefits of cooperation are so obvious that isolation becomes increasingly unattractive. What if they attack us? Elric asked. Then we defend ourselves, Roger replied. But we don't attack first, and we don't pursue vengeance beyond what's necessary to prevent future aggression. That seems fair, Elric said, returning to his mechanical project. Can I go to the Dragon Clan negotiations next week? I want to see how their fire breath works. If you promise to behave yourself and not try to copy their abilities, Elarian said with a smile. Your father and I are still recovering from the incident with the ice elementals. Elric grinned sheepishly. I said I was sorry about the frozen fountain, and it melted eventually. Eventually, Roger agreed dryly. After 3 days and some very expensive fire magic, their domestic tranquility was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger bearing the alliance seal. Elarian accepted the scroll with some trepidation, knowing that urgent communications usually meant new crises that required immediate attention. But as he read the message, his expression brightened considerably. Good news? Ismit asked. The best, Elarian replied. The celestial courts have agreed to formal recognition of the alliance. We're no longer just a political experiment, we're a legitimate nation in the eyes of the higher powers. The significance of the announcement could not be overstated. Recognition by the celestial courts, the ancient beings who governed the fundamental laws of reality, meant that their new society had proven its worth not just to mortals, but to the cosmos itself. So we're officially real now? Elric asked. We were always real, Roger said, pulling his son into a warm embrace. But now everyone else has to admit it. That evening, as they sat together on their garden terrace watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Elarian reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. 10 years ago, he had been a lonely diplomat trapped by demonic contracts and political constraints, unable to imagine a future that included love, family, or meaningful change. Now he was surrounded by the family he had chosen and the world they had built together, watching his son play with toys that represented technologies impossible under the old system, living in a society where cooperation had replaced competition as the primary organizing principle. Any regrets? Roger asked, seemingly reading his thoughts. Only that it took us so long to find each other, Elarian replied, echoing words that Ismit had spoken years earlier. And that we can't show the old world what they were missing, Ismit added. Though perhaps it's better this way. The past is gone and we can't change it. All we can do is build something better for the future. Elric suddenly looked up from his toys, his young face serious with the expression he wore when his magical senses detected something important. Someone's coming, he said. Someone powerful but not dangerous. They feel familiar. A moment later, a figure materialized in their garden, but not through any conventional means of transportation. Reality simply folded around them, revealing a being of such beauty and authority that even Ismit bowed in respectful greeting. Lady Celestine, Elarian said, recognizing one of the highest-ranking members of the celestial courts. This is an unexpected honor. The honor is mine, the celestial being replied, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of creation itself. I have come to congratulate you on what you have accomplished, and to offer a gift in recognition of your achievement. She turned her attention to Elric, who had approached without fear, his childish curiosity overcoming any sense of awe. You are the child of two worlds, Lady Celestine said gently, the bridge between old and new, the symbol of what becomes possible when love conquers fear. Would you accept a blessing from the celestial courts? Elric looked to his parents, who nodded encouragingly, then stepped forward with the same courage he had shown when facing the purest army years earlier. Lady Celestine placed her hand on his forehead, and immediately the air around them filled with soft, golden light. When it faded, Elric bore a small mark on his brow, a star-shaped symbol that pulsed with gentle radiance. This mark will identify you to all beings of power as one who is protected by the highest authorities, Lady Celestine explained. But more than that, it will serve as a reminder that the work you began here is part of a larger pattern, a cosmic evolution toward greater unity and understanding. Are there others like us? Elric asked with typical directness. Other places where different people are learning to work together? Many others, Lady Celestine confirmed. Your world is not unique in facing these challenges, but it is unique in how successfully you have met them. Your example has already begun to inspire similar movements in distant realms. The implication was staggering. Their small experiment in cooperation had somehow resonated across the cosmos, becoming part of a universal trend toward greater integration and mutual understanding. What happens next? Elarian asked. What happens next is up to you, Lady Celestine replied. The celestial courts do not dictate the future. We simply provide the framework within which free choices can be made. You have proven that love and cooperation are more powerful than fear and division. Now you must continue to prove it, day by day, choice by choice, generation by generation. With that, she began to fade, reality folding around her once again. Remember, her voice echoed as she disappeared. True change happens not in grand gestures, but in small acts of kindness repeated countless times. Continue to choose love over fear, understanding over prejudice, cooperation over conflict, and your legacy will endure long after your physical forms have returned to dust. And then she was gone, leaving the 3 adults and 1 remarkable child alone in their garden as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Well, Ismit said after a long moment of awed silence, I suppose that makes it official. We're not just rebuilding our world, we're helping to reshape the universe. No pressure, Roger said with a laugh that was only slightly nervous. We don't have to reshape the universe, Elric said practically. We just have to be nice to people and help them be nice to each other. The universe will take care of itself. Elarian smiled at his son's wisdom, marveling once again at how a child could see truth so clearly where adults saw only complexity. He's right, he said, pulling both Roger and Elric into a warm embrace while his Mitt watched with fond amusement. We don't need to carry the weight of cosmic destiny on our shoulders. We just need to love each other, protect each other, and trust that our choices will ripple outward in ways we can't imagine. As they sat together under the starlit sky, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of their thriving city, Elarian felt a deep sense of completion. Not the end of their story, but the fulfillment of its central promise. They had found each other across the barriers of species and circumstance. They had chosen love over duty, cooperation over conflict, hope over despair. And in doing so, they had created something that would endure long after their individual lives had ended. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and opportunities, setbacks and triumphs. But whatever came next, they would face it together, as they always had, as they always would. Three beings who had been broken by the old world, made whole by finding each other, and united in their determination to build something better for all who would come after. The alliance they had created would grow and evolve, would face new crises and celebrate new victories, would probably outlive them all. But its heart would always be the same, the simple truth that love is stronger than hate, that cooperation is more powerful than conflict, that choosing to see the best in others brings out the best in ourselves. And in their modest garden, as Elric fell asleep between his parents while his Mitt kept watch over them all, that truth continued to work its quiet magic, reshaping their world one moment, one choice, one act of love at a time.